The first night, Emily didn't come home. Daniel Carter realized how loud silence could be. He stood in the kitchen of their small suburban home in Portland, staring at two plates he had prepared hours earlier. The food had gone cold. The house felt frozen. The clock ticked steadily, but time felt stuck. Just that morning, Emily had kissed him goodbye before leaving for work, smiling the way she always did. She had promised they would watch a movie together that night. But instead of watching a movie, Daniel had spent the evening sitting beside her hospital bed. It had happened suddenly. Emily collapsed at her office. One moment she was fine, and the next moment she wasn't. The doctor said her body was under severe stress. She needed rest, care, and time to recover. Time, that word followed Daniel everywhere now. When he came home from the hospital, he didn't know what to do with himself. He walked through each room slowly, touching familiar objects like they were memories instead of things. Emily's coffee mug sat on the counter. Her sweater hung on the back of a chair. Her shoes rested by the door. Everything was still there, except her. Daniel sat on the couch and leaned forward, his hands covering his face. He felt helpless. He had always been the one who solved problems, who stayed calm, who supported Emily when she was stressed. But now he couldn't fix this. He couldn't speed up her recovery, couldn't bring her home faster. For the first time in years, Daniel felt completely lost. The next morning, he woke up after barely sleeping. His phone buzzed beside him. It was Margaret Lawson, Emily's mother. Daniel, her voice said gently when he answered. "I'm coming today." He didn't argue. He didn't question it. Simply said, "Okay." Margaret arrived that afternoon. She stepped out of her car with quiet strength, carrying a small suitcase. Her face showed concern, but also determination. She didn't waste time with long conversations. She walked into the house like she already knew what needed to be done. She looked around and immediately noticed the mess. Dishes in the sink, laundry unfolded, curtains still closed. She turned to Daniel. "Have you eaten?" she asked calmly. He hesitated. "I don't remember." She nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. Within an hour, the kitchen was clean. The windows were open. Fresh air moved through the house. Margaret moved with quiet purpose, restoring order without asking for thanks. Daniel watched her from the living room, unsure of what to say. She wasn't trying to replace Emily. She was trying to protect what Emily loved. That night, she cooked dinner. Daniel sat across from her, eating slowly. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until that moment. "She's strong," Margaret said softly. "Emily has always been strong." Daniel nodded. "I know." They didn't say much else. They didn't need to. Over the next few days, Margaret stayed. She woke up early, prepared breakfast, and made sure Daniel was ready for the day. She reminded him to bring Emily's favorite flowers to the hospital. She reminded him to take care of himself too. At first, Daniel felt uncomfortable being taken care of. He was used to being the one in control. But he couldn't deny the truth. He needed help. Each morning he drove to the hospital. He sat beside Emily, holding her hand. She smiled when she saw him, but her smile carried exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she whispered one day. He shook his head quickly. "You don't have to apologize." "I hate seeing you like this," she said weakly. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm right where I want to be." He stayed for hours, talking to her about small things, stories from work, things happening at home. It's cute. He wanted her to feel connected to normal life. But eventually, he always had to leave. And when he returned home, Marguerite was there. She never asked too many questions. She simply listened. One evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He looked drained. His shoulders were heavy, his eyes tired. Margaret handed him a cup of tea. "How was she today?" she asked. She smiled. He said quietly, "But she's still so weak." Margaret nodded. "She will get stronger." Her confidence comforted him, even though he still felt afraid. As days turned into weeks, Margaret became part of the house. Her presence filled the empty spaces Emily had left behind. She didn't change Emily's things. She respected them. But she made sure the house stayed alive. Daniel began to depend on her, without realizing it. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way. She gave him stability when everything else felt uncertain. One night, Daniel sat alone in the living room after returning from the hospital. The doctors had told him recovery would take longer than expected. He tried to stay positive, but fear had started to grow inside him. Margaret walked in and saw him sitting there in the dark. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat beside him quietly for a while. Neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said something he hadn't said to anyone. "I'm scared." Margaret didn't react with surprise. She simply listened. "I don't know what life looks like without her," he continued. "She's everything." Margaret placed her hand gently over his dot. Was a simple gesture, warm, steady, double quotes. "You won't lose her," she said calmly. "You just have to believe in her strength." Her words didn't erase his fear completely, but they gave him something to hold on to. Hope. After that night, Daniel noticed Margaret differently. He noticed her quiet strength. He noticed how she carried her own loneliness without complaining. Her husband had passed away years ago. She had lived alone ever since. She understood loss in a way Daniel never had. They began talking more, not just about Emily. About life, about memories, about pain. Margaret shared stories about Emily as a child. How she used to laugh loudly, how she always cared for others. She never gave up easily. Daniel listened carefully. It made him love Emily even more. One afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He found Margaret sitting by the window, looking outside. She looked peaceful, but also alone, for the first time. Daniel realized she was carrying her own emotional weight too. She wasn't just helping him. She was protecting herself from her own fears. He walked into the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee. When he handed her one, she smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. It was a small moment, but it meant something. Daniel began to realize how much she had given without asking for anything in return. She had stepped into chaos. It brought calm. She had stepped into silence and brought comfort. She had stepped into loneliness and brought presence. And Daniel didn't feel as alone anymore. He still loved Emily deeply. That never changed. But Margaret had become something important too. Source of strength. A source of understanding. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, people could carry each other. One night, Daniel stood in the hallway outside Emily's room. He looked at their photos on the wall. Memories of vacations, birthdays, quiet moments together. He promised himself he would protect their love. He would wait. He would stay loyal. He would be strong, but deep inside. He also knew something else had changed. Margaret had quietly taken over the broken parts of his life and helped him stand again. And without realizing it, Daniel had begun to lean on her in ways he never expected. Not because he wanted to replace Emily, but because sometimes, when the person you love is hurting, the heart searches for strength wherever it can find it. And Margaret Lawson had become that strength. He didn't know what it meant yet. He only knew one thing. The house didn't feel empty anymore, and that scared him almost as much as the silence once had. The moment Daniel realized something was changing inside him, he tried to ignore it. It happened on an ordinary evening. He had just returned from the hospital after another long day beside Emily. She was improving, but slowly. Her voice was still soft, her body still weak. Every time he left her room, he felt like he was leaving a part of himself behind. When he opened the front door, he smelled fresh food. The lights were on. The house felt alive again. Margaret was in the kitchen, stirring a pot calmly. She turned when she heard him. "You're home," she said gently. Daniel nodded and placed his keys on the table. He didn't realize how tired he looked until she saw him. "You should sit," she said. He didn't argue. He sat down, and within minutes, she placed a warm plate in front of him. He stared at it for a moment, then looked up at her. You don't have to do all this, he said quietly. Margaret gave a small smile. I know, she replied. I want to. Her answer stayed in his mind longer than he expected. Days continued. Moving forward, Emily improved little by little. She talked more during his visits. She even laughed once at something he said, and that sound gave him hope. But recovery was still slow, and the doctor said she needed patience. Daniel gave her everything he had. But when he returned home, Margaret was the one who held his broken pieces together. She reminded him to eat. She reminded him to sleep. She reminded him that he was still human, not just someone waiting in fear. They started sharing small moments without planning to. Morning coffee before he left for the hospital. Quiet dinners in the evening. Conversations that began with Emily, but slowly moved into deeper places. Margaret spoke about her husband one night, how he had been her best friend, how losing him had changed her forever. There's a silence that comes after loss, she said quietly. It doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it. Daniel understood her words more than he wanted. Too, he wasn't losing Emily, but he had come close enough to feel that fear. One evening, a storm hit the neighborhood. Rain fell heavily against the windows, and thunder echoed through the house. The power flickered but stayed on. The world outside felt distant. Daniel sat on the couch, staring at nothing. Margaret sat nearby, reading a book. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt understood. After a while, she closed her book. She's getting stronger, Margaret said. Daniel nodded. Yes. He paused, then added, I don't know what I would have done without you. Margaret looked at him carefully. Few would have survived, she said. He shook his head. Not like this. Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't planned, it wasn't intentional, but it was real. Daniel looked away first. That night he couldn't sleep. He wasn't confused about his love for Emily. That love was still there, solid and unshaken. But something else had grown quietly alongside it, not love, not desire, but attachment. Margaret had become part of his emotional survival, and that truth made him uncomfortable. He began noticing things he hadn't before. The way she smiled, when she saw him come home safely, the way she always knew when he was hiding his fear, the way her presence made the house feel less heavy. She never crossed any boundaries. She never said anything inappropriate. But emotional closeness didn't need words. It lived in quiet moments. One afternoon at the hospital, Emily looked at him with soft eyes. You look tired, she said. I'm okay, he replied. She studied him carefully. You've been strong for me, he smiled. I'll always be strong for you. She reached for his hand. I know. But as he sat there, he realized something. He had been strong because Margaret had helped carry his weight. That realization filled him with guilt, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had come close to needing someone else, in ways he never expected. That evening, he returned home and found Margaret sitting alone. She looked thoughtful, quiet, almost distant. Is everything okay? He asked. She nodded slowly. But her voice carried something deeper. They sat together, but the air felt different now. Both of them understood something without saying it. This situation wouldn't last forever. Emily would come home, life would return to normal, and Margaret would leave. The thought left an unexpected emptiness in Daniel's chest. A week later, the doctor gave them good news. Emily would be discharged soon. Daniel should have felt only happiness, and he did. But mixed with that happiness was something else. Fear of change. Fear of losing the stability Margaret had brought into his life. He hated himself for feeling that way, because he knew where his heart belonged. It's with Emily. Always with Emily. That night, when he told Margaret the news, she smiled warmly. Wonderful, she said. He nodded. Yes. But he noticed something in her eyes. Relief and sadness. both at the same time. Over the next few days, Margaret began packing her things quietly. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't seek attention. She simply prepared to leave. Daniel noticed, but didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to ask her to stay, but he knew he couldn't, and he knew he shouldn't. One morning, he found her standing near the front door with her suitcase. She looked calm, peaceful. "I'm leaving today," she said gently. The words hit him harder than expected. "So soon?" he asked. She nodded. "You won't need me anymore." He stepped closer. "That's not true." She smiled softly. "It is?" He struggled to find the right words. "You helped me more than you know." She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was steady. "You helped yourself," she said. He shook his head. "I couldn't have done it alone." She looked at him with deep understanding.